Yeah, we're in the home stretch here of the Oslo Freedom Forum, so thank you so much for coming and participating here for this really important conversation we're about to have here. So, when Qatar prepared to host the 2022 World Cup, Abdullah Ibhais, right here, worked as a media manager for the Qatar's organizing committee. He bravely risked everything by defying instructions to cover up migrant worker abuses at a World Cup construction site. And within a matter of months, he was fired, arrested on trumped-up charges, and sentenced to 3 years in prison after an unfair trial. After enduring more than 1,250 days of imprisonment marked by torture and mistreatment, Ibhais was released in 2025, just a couple of months ago. He's now speaking publicly for the first time at the Oslo Freedom Forum about his ordeal and the shocking bloody cost behind a tournament that is now celebrated as one of the greatest World Cups of all time. Abdullah, you and I have met only just a few days ago, and when we started talking, you said something really, really interesting to me, which is you felt this sort of overwhelming guilt about the work you did while you were in Qatar, obviously before you had been imprisoned. And we're both Arabs. You're Jordanian, I'm Egyptian. And I immediately thought to myself, what guilt? I mean, I understand that a lot of us in the Arab world, this is our story, unfortunately. Our countries are struggling and we end up migrating and traveling and looking for better opportunities. It seemed to me that that had been what you were doing, going and trying to find an opportunity. But you said something really interesting, which is, no, you didn't do it for the money. It was more sort of believing in this ideal of what this World Cup could be. Can you talk through that a little bit with me?
Yeah, basically I felt guilt because I allowed myself to be fooled, and I shouldn't have done that, because when I decided to go to Qatar and work for the World Cup, when I decided to go to Qatar in the first word, it wasn't for the money. I had a job in Lebanon and I was doing very well. I didn't really need to go to Qatar, but I wanted to, because back then I went in 2012. It was the Arab Spring. It was during the Arab Spring still, if you can call it spring. And Qatar seemed to be the only country that was in support of the popular risings that are taking place all around the Arab world. So I thought, if there is one place that is still good, that you can still work for a government without feeling guilty about it, it was Qatar. Of course, I was stupid, but I didn't realize that then. So when I worked for the World Cup, I thought that I was part of a good thing. I was part of a change. I didn't for a moment stop to think that I was part of a propaganda or covering up for or sustaining a regime that is exactly doing what he is preaching against in other parts of the Arab world.
So this is all fascinating. We're going to get back to this topic and sort of what you ended up discovering there. But I'd like to first take a step back to, you now arrive in Qatar, you have this job. What does the job entail exactly, and what were you doing for the organizing committee? And when did it start?
Well, I joined them in 2014, but I didn't join them immediately as a manager. I was mostly working on a local media, which is creating Arabic content for them. It lasted for for a few years, so I didn't exactly know all the details about my job back then, or about the media department back then, because I was focused on creating content. Mm-hmm. Now, as we moved on and I got promoted, I started to see things. I started to attend meetings that I was not part of before. I started to see that we are not always honest. And it was fine when we were just trying to get out of a small trouble, like the delays in delivery, mm-hmm. or people saying, oh, it's going to be too hot, or it was fine to play around those things because you're not really doing anything harmful to anyone. But then I started to see that we are more or less lying about a lot of things.
Give me an example.
The first time I had trouble with what we were doing is when the Supreme Committee wanted to advertise their innovative projects, which is introducing cooling vests for workers in construction sites, which was a hoax, basically, because they wanted to talk about it. They want to like produce short documentaries and commercials and trailers talking about how this will change the face of the Middle East, how working in Gulf will be much better, how we are actually delivering change even ahead of the World Cup. And my simple question was, when did we use this? I've never seen it on site. And they were like, don't worry about that.
Oh.
So I asked about like tests. I asked them, is there a site we can go and meet the workers and talk about it? And then the head of workers' welfare back then, he said, no, I can't talk about it. Of course, an American citizen getting more than $30,000 a month can talk about how a cooling vest is great for workers. So I rejected that back then. I told them I'm not going to talk about this. I haven't seen it on being used, so I'm not going to even hustle doing anything about it. And their reply was to take away the part about workers' welfare from the media department and establish an independent workers' welfare media department with obviously people who were happy to talk about their great deliveries.
Okay, so 2 quick questions out of that. First of all, did these cooling vests ever come to be, or was this something that just was a complete hoax that never existed?
To the best of my knowledge, they were never used. And even their idea was like, I don't think it was even scientifically proved or tested. It was just the idea of putting some cooling gel inside a vest, and that will be great for everyone.
So, I mean, public relations at least requires some sort of reality to spin, but this was just inventing fiction, basically.
This is exactly what it was. And to a certain extent, a lot of our projects were the same. Like, I remember we always talked about how the stadiums will be dismantled after the tournament, and that the chairs and all the infrastructure will be donated to other countries. There is this stadium that was made out of containers. It's called 974. It used to be called Ras Al Aboud. And I remember I wrote so many press releases and statements and did so many interviews talking about how this will be given to countries that need like sports infrastructure in Africa or Asia. But it still stands. Nothing has changed. They are still playing international matches in it. And you would think, oh, but they will play like league matches in that stadium. But they don't. It's just there. Whenever they have an international match, they will take it there because it's nice, it's on the beach, and that's it. They never even delivered on the smallest promises they made, like dismantling a stadium that was built as a temporary structure.
I remember all the PR that came out around that stadium and how it was this grand achievement of sustainability that would then go to be used for other things. I remember reading that extensively everywhere. But this leads me to what you're saying is you were doing a lot of these PR and public relations press releases that you were putting out. Is that the extent of your job, or was there an element of media manipulation? Did you need to do spins, or was there levels of intimidation for journalists? Like, what was the extent of the job in general?
Well, no, it entailed, like, since early 2019, it had much wider scope than just creating content. Now we're working on a base that Qatar is the underdog, that they were trying to create something that had never happened before. They were trying to gap or build bridges between West and East. They were trying to bring positive change to the region. They are changing the way FIFA is thinking about the region, Arabs and Muslims. So having that in mind, I believed, and a lot of us believed, that there was Western media bias against Qatar. So we needed to find a way to deal with it.
So it was a unifying force, almost, this idea that, oh, we're the underdogs, they're coming after us, and we're actually doing some good here.
Yes, it was. And always in internal communication, we focused on this. We focused on the fact that the change that we are bringing to workers' welfare in Qatar it's not acceptable. It's not socially acceptable, and we were introducing it for the first time. So this is what we always heard and what we always talked about. it's not only to the external world, even internally. This is what we were always told to was the focus of our work beyond the World Cup itself. That's why they called it the Supreme Committee. Of course, Supreme is Supreme because it's Qatari. But for delivery, which
Gulf loves the word supreme.
For the projects and legacy for the change that we are about to bring to the country. So yes, it was at the core of our work. Now, having all this background in mind, we had an agenda, obviously, because our agenda was to bypass the Western bias against Qatar and to focus on the positive change.
Interesting. And when you do something like that, I recall being at a conference last year, also here in Norway, where a Danish, I believe it was a Danish PR consultant who did work for Qatar, went on stage and sort of described the various ways he would put a spin and turn a journalist's sort of investigation or story against them, whether it be claiming the numbers were falsified, etc. Was that part of the work you were doing, or were you working sort of hand in hand with those PR agencies being hired?
Well, we had a media strategy called drop by drop.
Okay.
Which is just try to inject the positive aspect of your work wherever it was possible.
Mm-hmm.
So you would engage with critical journalists, you would engage with anyone basically, and then you will try to tell or to have part of your narrative mentioned in their article, be it whatever it is, even if he was critical, at least he will get a quote from you. He will get, you will take him on a side visit. You will take him somewhere where he will see how World Cup workers are doing in our sites. You will give him an interview, an exclusive interview that he will make part of his coverage, even if it was negative.
Mm-hmm.
So you will always have a way to inject your story within a coverage. That is one part of it. Of course, there's also these visits that we were taken to as well. It's not only the journalists. Like when we joined the SC, we were all taken to workers' accommodation to see how the change is being done. So part of your induction in the...
I like that you use that term because it does feel like an induction.
Yes, in the SC is to go to visit workers' sites and see that, yes, we are changing things. They are doing well. So we also, after joining, we will take the journalists to those sites so they would see change. Even if they saw somewhere else that was bad, we will tell them that we want every place to look like this one, and we're giving an example, or for everybody to look up for.
It's fascinating that even you, as the media manager, were sort of, and the people you were working with were indoctrinated into this. It's almost like being indoctrinated into a cult, which you then go, once you believe in, you can then go and spread the word thereafter. So that feels like it's sort of...
More or less.
Yeah.
Indoctrinated, yes.
Yeah. But I have a question for you, and maybe I'm asking this because I'm Egyptian, but was the strategy different with the West versus the Arab world, let's say? I'm sure it was, but I'm also thinking of the Gulf blockade, which was ongoing when you were working there as well. And for those who don't know, for quite a few years, the vast majority of the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and even Egypt, for some reason, were involved in a massive blockade against Qatar for a lot of reasons, with an insistence on excessive demands for Qatar to completely change the way it exists, to remove Al Jazeera and all sorts of different things. That blockade fell apart ahead of the World Cup. So what role did all this play in terms of how you presented the World Cup to these different audiences?
There are many different levels to this question, but I'll start with the overall strategy. So the Arab, when I joined, they were more focused on English-speaking media or the international media. And then at some point, we all realized that it would be more beneficial to kind of flip their pyramid. So start with the Arab world, because they were, like myself, they were easier to convince, because you already have a preconception about how the West sees the region and how they think, how they cover the news in the region. So you start by having grassroots in the Arab world, and then you bypass the English-speaking media by going directly and generating content, for example, in Spanish, in Mandarin, in so Arabic, Spanish, and Mandarin. Those were the top three, and then the English media.
Interesting.
So by doing this, you have created much more positive content online and everywhere than you had before. And then people searching outside of the English-speaking countries can find their localized content without having the media barrier between you and your audiences, or critical media barrier. So this way, everyone saw, like, fans that were coming from South America were pretty happy about the tournament, and basically ignored most of the controversies that were surrounding the World Cup.
That even applies to my own country, Egypt, where when I went back to visit shortly after the World Cup, the amount of people who came up to me and say, see how great this Arab World Cup is. And I say this specifically because it was shocking, because Egypt and Egyptians don't have a great relationship with Qatar. There's a lot of reasons not worth getting into right now for a lack of time, but it shocked me just how much they were willing to put all that aside, put all that contested relation aside, and accept this as sort of the Arab World Cup, and look how well we were represented on the world stage. Everybody seemed to have been indoctrinated into the process. But my question now for you is, when did all of this start going wrong, really? Apart from the example you mentioned, you said that, okay, you refused to write about the cooling vests, and they set up a whole entire different committee to focus on that. But that must have created some tension, and then what happens thereafter?
Well, it started going wrong, and like after I became a media manager, 2 months after I became a media manager,
okay.
Everything started going wrong. So this vest controversy that I had with them, also, like I wanted to visit one of the sites one time, and then I was delayed at the gate. I am staff. I shouldn't be delayed. So it took them like 10 or 15 minutes to allow me into the stadium. And when I went back to my superiors and said, how, like, this is not right, you shouldn't delay me, I should have instant access because I need to see
what's happening, of course.
And then they introduced a new procedure which is called a site visit request, that is applicable to all SC staff other than engineers and workers. So that was a red flag.
Of course it was.
Because they must have something to hide afterwards. After doing so, I was pretty sure they had something to hide.
At that point, what were you thinking they were hiding? Like, what was going through your mind? Like,
it's obvious hiding? What they're hiding is the working conditions on site.
On site at the stadium at that moment.
Because why wouldn't you allow a staff member to access the construction site? Of course, they said it was about safety kits. So you have to do this request because we need to prepare you with the proper PPE. So you needed to have your boots, your helmets. It's like they are looking after you. So they said, sometimes we don't have the right sizes. And we also had to put the shoe size on the request, of course, because it was about us.
But they could really fix that all in the 10, 15 minutes you were waiting? Suddenly the conditions were at par?
Fix what?
Well, well, that's my thing. You're saying you were waiting outside for 10, 15 minutes. They're covering something up. Is 10, 15 minutes even enough for them to fix the working conditions?
Of course, because they have like flags on site. If they raise the red flag, every single worker at site goes to the accommodation. It means that work had stopped, and then, so when I arrived, there was an orange flag, which means only necessary staff stay on site. And that is like 10, 15 people. That was that.
Wow.
So yeah, it's enough time.
Incredible. So from there, you're starting to see these things and you're starting to question what's going on here. What's the next interaction?
The next was the actual strike that took place in a place called the Shahaniya in Qatar, where hundreds of workers were striking because they were not getting paid. And basically they had enough. So they were marching in a street called Dukhan Highway. They closed the highway. And then some people took videos. It reached the social media. And everything started then because we knew about it. We saw the videos. And then the Secretary General of the Supreme Committee asked us to deny the fact that there are World Cup workers and to say that whatever they are claiming is not accurate. So having the past experiences with them, I didn't believe that. I drove my car to the strike site. Of course, the police have obviously moved everybody back to their accommodations. So I went to one of the accommodations that belonged to a company called Scan. And I saw the workers there. They were around, I'd say 140 in that particular place. I shot some videos with the workers who said they were actually World Cup workers. They were on World Cup sites. They haven't received their salaries for 6 months, and they had no food, no drinking water, and no running electricity. And that was August. So the temperature was 49, 48. So they were living in hell, basically. And we called a charity, basically, who brought food and water for them the next day. So if that's not evidence enough, I don't know what is. And I went with the charity and I took photos of them distributing food and water for the workers. And I rejected to issue a statement. And that's when everything went wrong, because the Secretary General, Hassan Dawadi, said, you have to put a spin on it. I refused. They insisted. I resigned. And apparently I was not allowed to leave after that, because they thought if I leave and talk about it, I will discredit the SC. Discrediting the SC is discrediting Qatar, and they have spent so much money, and the tournament is so close for them to allow something like that to happen.
Now, before we move forward here, I just want you to describe what you mean when you say you couldn't leave, because for most people, they think, okay, I quit my job, I'm in a different country, I can just pack up, I got my passport, I can leave. What are you referring to exactly? Because, I mean, we've heard stories like this before.
Without them accepting your resignation, you cannot leave the country because you need an exit permit. So if you go to the airport and try to leave, by default, it's not a travel ban. You cannot leave. You need an exit permit to be in the system. Otherwise, you just stay. You can't change jobs because they are your sponsor. Even on that level, they are my sponsor, and I can't change my job without having an accepted resignation and a non-objection letter or certification. So I can move jobs. So basically, I can't leave, I can't change my job, and I can't travel, and I cannot even stay at home, because that is abscondment. That is 6 months in jail. You have to go to work. So it's as simple as this. I can't leave.
So your resignation was just an act in thin air that doesn't even really
They
count
rejected
at that
it.
point. Of
Yeah.
course, exactly. They rejected. So
it doesn't mean anything.
So they rejected and they don't let you go. But what makes them take this next decision instead of just silencing you and hoping that this level of intimidation will be enough to keep you quiet? How did this escalate?
Because I resigned, because I was willing to leave. I was just promoted 6 months before, or no, 7 months before.
Yes.
So they thought if money is not working, then there is no other way.
It's the Arab way at this point.
Exactly. Like, we paid the guy and he still speaks. So
hide him behind the sun.
Exactly. So that was that. So they told me, my manager came and told me, no, we are so close to the tournament. We have so many milestones. You can't just leave abruptly. And like, there are a few things you finish and then you can leave. A few days after, she asked me to be part of a tender for social media content. And I immediately refused because I had my concerns about the transparency of tenders in the sea. And she said, no, you want to leave? You do this and then you leave. This is very important. You have the experience. You did the scope of work. You can't give this to anyone else. It is very sensitive and it involves a lot of money.
So blackmail, basically.
Yes, basically, yes. So I agreed. We did this tender. And my recommendation was to cancel the whole thing because there was no one that was technically eligible or that passed the technical evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
After I submitted I submitted the final report in September. Of course, it wasn't only me. We were like 7 people, I guess, or something like that, if I recall correctly. But after I submitted the final report, I asked them to let me go again, and I applied for an exit permit.
Okay.
The next day I applied for the exit permit. They started an internal investigation and a wrongdoing in the tender process.
Okay.
Of course, they never told us what was the wrongdoing. They did the internal investigation. They met me. I gave a statement. It finished 5 days after. The day after, I went to office, and then human resources director called me. He said, "Come to my office." I went to his office, and there was state security officers and police waiting for me there. They took my phone and took me into custody.
Okay. And what happens next? Tell me about the experience of being detained and what leads you to being put into jail at that point. What did they do? And,
But it's a typical Arab police station experience.
Yes,
So
yes, unfortunately.
you wouldn't expect much out of it. They took me to a detention center, kept me for quite a long time, and then a police officer came. I asked for a lawyer. He basically laughed. And he said, even if you can't speak to a lawyer, of course, I wasn't allowed the phone call or anything. But he said, even if somehow you manage to find a lawyer, if he tries to enter this building, we'll break his leg. And he brought an already printed document, ready-made document. He said, sign.
All he needs is your signature.
Yes, he said, sign. Like, one way or another, you're signing this. So when I refused, he said, okay, we will send you now to administrative detention for 6 months. We will not tell your wife or kids where you are. And then we'll see if you sign or not. And when I refused again, he said, okay, so we will send you to a state security facility, and they know very well how to get a signature out of you or a confession out of you. And at that moment, I thought that no matter what I did, I'm just prolonging the process for myself.
Yes.
Sooner or later, I will sign. And after I went to jail, I discovered that everyone, sooner or later, will sign a confession. The easy way or the hard way, he will sign a confession. So I signed it. And it was maybe 11 p.m. or something like that. At 5:30 a.m., they came again. They said, you're going to the public prosecution. And I went to the public prosecution, state security public prosecution. And I asked for a lawyer again. They laughed again. But they had another smart comment to make then, and they said, you think you're in an American movie, huh? And I said, so what do you want now? And he said, just answer with a yes or no. And he started by reading my charges, which started with leaking defense secrets and conspiring with foreign countries.
Oh, did they even mention the countries?
Of course, Saudi and UAE. They were the blockading countries. And also harming the national economy. And then the last one was tampering with the tender process. I refused to accept any of them, and he said, okay, so here's the deal. You either confess to the last one, or you will be indicted with all of them. So you have an option here, and I'm making you a good deal. You either face 5 years in prison or life to death penalty. It's like, okay, interesting. Where do I sign?
I mean, they didn't exactly leave you with a choice at this point.
No.
There's no rules, no rule of law. There are no lawyers.
No.
There's nothing, no one, and nothing to protect you. Your government is certainly not coming to your aid.
Yes. And I thought I was smart because when I asked, like I told him, can you just write that I don't have a lawyer and that I have asked for a lawyer, basically. And he said, of course. And he wrote it down. They never cared about it. So he actually, I have the document and from the public prosecution that says this was done without a lawyer present. But obviously no one cares about it. So I signed that. I stayed in detention for 40 days, and then I was released by a court order.
On bail?
Yes.
Yes.
And then I was waiting for a year and a half without knowing what were my charges. Will I be facing death penalty or just 5 years?
Or just 5 years.
So I sent like 3 lawyers to the public prosecution. They said he has no case. We don't have this name. They went to the police station. They said the same. And on January 2021, I received an email just informing me that I have a hearing tomorrow morning. Lucky me, I had a lawyer. So I called him. He came. We went to the court. The judge asked me if I was guilty. I said no. We submitted our requests. And 2 weeks later, for the first time, I received my case file.
Extraordinary.
Yes.
And then you still end up going and serving 3 years in prison.
And then he denied all our requests. He held another hearing and then decided to just give us a decision. I had 5 years, and then we went to the appeal court. Until that moment, I couldn't believe what was going on. I still had hope. I didn't speak to the media. I didn't speak to few. I didn't speak to anyone. I still thought that this can't be real.
Of course.
Something must be wrong. And I thought someone at some point will say, okay, this is wrong. We have to do something about it. When I went to the first appeal session, and that was in September 2021, the judge called my name. When I stood up, he looked at me and said, so you think you can fight the state? Exactly, I laughed. And he didn't like it.
What else can you do?
And going out from that session, I knew that I had no choice. So whatever would come my way will come my way. And I sent emails to the media, to Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, and everyone. And I had all the evidence, about what happened. I have requests that this is how much they don't care. Like my request to ask for my case file was denied on a system, and it's documented, and they don't care. Like the interrogation happened without a lawyer, it is documented, and they don't care. So obviously they knew that nothing will change their minds. And after I started speaking to the media, on the day that I had an interview with NRK in Doha, they came and took me into custody. I started a hunger strike then, and soon enough, an officer came, and a hunger strike would require you to take just a small amount of salt every day. So it's a long story, just to be able to
Of course, yes.
Continue. So he took the salt away, and he said,
Go ahead.
And he said, my directions are not to keep you alive. We don't care if you die. My directions is to keep you silenced. So if you think you'll get anywhere, you're wrong. And my advice to you is to stop this and accept whatever comes your way. Yes, and from that day on, I was in jail until last March.
It's an extraordinary story on so many levels, and I feel like I can ask questions for hours and hours to go. I'm realizing slowly that we are going to be running out of time, but I still do have a couple of questions for you, which, first of all, I'd like to quickly know what was your experience in prison during that time? Because I don't think people quite understand what prisons are like in the Arab world, not to mention what prisons are like in the Gulf and the type of people who are in prison in the Gulf.
It would take a lot of time, but
Yes.
let's just put it this way. It was overcapacitated.
Mm-hmm.
The food was inadequate.
Mm-hmm.
Hygiene was non-existent. Healthcare was non-existent. And basically, you live every day on the whim of the warden, who can make your life hell or just have a good day if he's happy. But that was for everyone.
Of course.
Of course, I had further restrictions on connection with the outside world, with my family, and with calls and visits. But overall, it was horrible for all of us inside, which made it a little bit easier because we were all suffering the same.
Some commiseration and some sort of solidarity joined together like
yes.
that.
But yeah, I mean, it was horrible enough.
I can only imagine. Now, amongst the entities that I can imagine you have legitimate anger towards, there's not just obviously the Qatar Supreme Committee, etc., which goes without saying, but I can imagine FIFA plays into this as well. Considering their ideals of unifying the world.
I'd say FIFA had fun. They have tried their whistleblower system for once. It works. You can submit a complaint. They can reply.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. I contacted FIFA. I submitted the documents through their whistleblowing system. They replied with a PR statement saying that they will look closely into this and continue to work with the Qatari government to ensure a fair trial. Which is funny because even when the UN decided it was not a fair trial, my family sent an email to FIFA telling them, so what do you think now, guys? They just ignored us. Mm-hmm. They kept ignoring us since October 2021 until this day. They have never answered an email or commented on the case.
And how does that make you feel just personally and about the organization itself? Again, this organization that preaches peace and unity through football and has the power and influence it does, and it continues to work with more authoritarian regimes. I mean, we have Saudi on the horizon. We have a ridiculous World Cup about to take place in the United States as well. Like, the list goes on at this point.
Well, I can't say I'm very disappointed. I would have expected this from FIFA. I mean, come on, we have one more tyrant in the world, more or less. Mm-hmm. But when you start tolerating them, when you start accepting their existence in the first place, this is what you get.
Now, I just want to know again, you've been out for just a couple of months. How are you feeling? This cannot be a simple change for you right now. And you're here in Oslo, there's been a lot of attention. You know, a lot of people are coming up to you and talking to you about your story. You've had to rehash the story, including to me right now with these hard questions. How are you feeling? I mean, you've had a chance to finally reunite with your family as well. That's I mean,
cool. Overall, it feels great. I'm back with my family. I can talk. Nothing to complain about.
Do you know what you're going to do moving forward? At least with regards to this case, let's say. I mean, the world's your oyster, but I'm talking about with regards to this.
Yeah, I'll try to hold them accountable. I'll try everything I can to sue both Qatar and FIFA for negligence, arbitrary detention, lying, everything.
And I certainly hope you sue them to high heaven. I really hope you're able to do that. Thank you so much. So, I will stretch this just a little bit. We are exactly at the end of time now, but let's take a couple of questions if people have questions for Abdullah. I believe somebody had left me a mic to pass around. Yes. Anybody have questions? Here you go.
Thank you. Abdullah, thank you so much. It's truly a privilege to hear you speak, and thank you for bringing light to an issue that led to so much darkness, modern slavery in this day and age. I wondered, Did you see firsthand or experience or part of this court case take on the deaths that occurred in the building of this stadium? And do you think FIFA is as responsible for these deaths as the Qatari government?
I have never seen a death or a death report. That is not something they share with the SC on any level. So whenever it happens, the SC is out and the police is in. It is so strict that even workers on site, engineers who are running the site, are evacuated. So we wouldn't know anything about it. What I knew later when I was in prison from people who told me about their cousins' deaths and things like that, that whenever a death happens, either of a heat stroke or a construction site accident, it will be recorded officially as a heart failure. And some of the embassies there are also part of it because they do not ask for an investigation. So at least 3 or 4 people have told me about cousins or friends who died on work sites. And instead of getting an actual accident report, they will get a report that this is a heart failure. They will be shipped, buried, and no one will examine the body, and no one will come to know the truth.
Andreas.
My name is Andreas Elios. I'm a journalist. Thank you for speaking up, and thank you for that you are a free person now. You were arrested before you were supposed to meet the Norwegian public broadcaster. Why were you arrested exactly at that time?
Excellent question.
To silence me. This is what they said. This is what they said explicitly. They just came to me and said, you are not allowed to talk anymore, and my orders is to silence you. So they didn't want this to go on. I was creating a little bit of headache more than they thought I would, and they couldn't tolerate this anymore.
Was it because you were going to meet a Norwegian broadcaster because Norway had been, or at least the Norwegian Football Federation, or Lise Klaveness had been very critical toward, or that Norwegian opinion had been critical toward that, but maybe this was before Klaveness was elected, but because it was Norway, or was it just an accident?
No, I believe it's not an accident. I believe that I was being followed and monitored, and we made a mistake where they confirmed that they were coming over the phone. Basically, that's it. I don't think it was against Norway itself, no, but it was because I had an interview before with ITV, but it was all through communication through Signal. They didn't know about it. But this guy just decided to call me on my phone, and here it is. I think they didn't want me to do any interviews or media engagements further.
Any other questions?
That's okay. I just wanted to ask, do you still feel scared or nervous by any further retribution from that government?
Scared or nervous? No. Am I expecting that they will do something? Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Any more questions? Michael.
Abdullah, did Qatar reach out to you any time after you were released, or maybe threatened you with if you speak out with a lawsuit or something like that?
No, not yet. But they did something funny. They lodged a report in Jordan to ask me to be reinvestigated when I go back, just to make my life a little bit harder.
And what has Jordan done? Has Jordan followed up on that? Have they agreed to it?
Well, they have to follow up to a certain stage, so they have to conduct an interview, and then they have to lodge a report to the Arab police.
So has this already happened, or is this going to
happen?
It happened already.
The day I went back, instead of going home, I went to the police station. Wow. So I gave an interview, I gave a statement they had to include in the report, and but that was that. They didn't really take it seriously so far.
May I also ask a question regarding Jordan? So, if I understood correctly, the Jordan embassy never supported you during the trial, or
Not
what was their
ever
role?
or never. They tried. Actually, they sent a letter from the Jordanian foreign minister to the Qatari Minister of Labor. And he just said, like, guys, don't interfere. And, I mean, realistically, they stopped interfering. Because what else they can do?
We have time for one more.
You said yesterday that you, in retrospect, would have done something different. You said yesterday that, in retrospect, you would have done something different, and that you think that you could have handled it somehow differently while there.
Something different in terms of how I handled the situation. If anything different, I wouldn't go to Qatar. I wouldn't work for them. That's it.
Yeah, but is that your suggestion for others then?
I mean, I wouldn't advise anyone to go work in the Gulf for any reason, because you are not safe and anything can happen to you. It's as simple as this.
I think that's an important note for us to finish on. Thank you so much, Abdullah, for being here.